welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. Wanted to do a special episode focused on stock risers for Rutgers football following the conclusion of spring camp. No better place to start news that Athan Kaliakmanis was named starting quarterback. His stock is obviously up because of that. David, what were your thoughts on the announcement and what this means moving forward?
I, like most people, was surprised that this happened, but I do think it was the right thing. I really thought you did a good job covering a lot of it on the podcast yesterday about the implications of it. Really, it just is one more thing we need to think about, like NFL free agency, where it's going to be really hard you can't trade someone for an asset like you can in the NFL, but you have to just be honest with yourself and your players to maintain a professional environment. And I look back and I think of the San Diego Chargers, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers situation. I mean, they had Phillip Rivers on his rookie deal. They could have easily re-signed Drew Brees after a great season, but that would have just fractured the locker room. And obviously, both quarterbacks went on to have a lot more good years. I mean, obviously, we hope the best for Gavin. We hope, obviously, Athan works out as well. But there's no way that you could have maintained the dynamic in that locker room if you were, in that case, the San Diego Chargers. In this case, I mean, maybe Greg Schiano, these guys are a little bit younger. It's possible that you would have been able to make everybody happy. But I think the key point I would take away from your previous podcast, which I recommend listeners check out again if they hadn't seen it, is that eventually, if you don't control a situation, somebody is going to leave. And that may or may not be the person that is best for your program. Maybe best for them, but it may not be best for your program. And so in this case, yeah, I'm going to feel a little bit apprehensive that early in the season, if Kaliakmanis gets injured or is ineffective for that matter, that Shepard might not be where Gavin is, obviously, as to going in as a backup. That said, I do think in the long term that the bowl win last year bought them a lot of currency that you can start thinking about more longer term in this moment. And I know in college football, when we say long term nowadays, it's 2 years, not 10, not 5. It's like 2 years. But really what we're talking about now is, okay, I doubt you're going to have more than 3 scholarship quarterbacks. I think Johnny Shepard showed something nice. We talked about if Gavin Wimsatt was to get some goal line package, even if he was handing to running backs, which we'll talk more about in a second. But I think that Shepard is more than capable of just powering from 1 yard out like Gavin did on 7 of his 11 touchdown runs a season ago. So I do think that and then the opportunity for growth to ensure that you're seeing how much a guy can improve is what you're getting out of this. So I think you covered it pretty well yesterday, but it's better that it happened now probably than it happened a week before the season starts. And now Gavin's been practicing with the 2s, and now Shepard's coming in totally to the 2 deep, or Surace for that matter, if he shows progress in summer camp. And like these guys have not done that. So I'm happy. And then the other last thing I'll say about the quarterbacks is you also have to evaluate your offensive coordinator. And so if he's got his guys in there, there's no excuses. I'm not saying Kirk Schreck is on the hot seat. He did a great job in his first year, and he's got a decent-sized contract. It's not like you're going to send him packing. But every year is another opportunity to evaluate your staff and what they can and can't do. And so now there's less excuses for the Rutgers passing offense. They have to do better. End of story.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of good points there. And I think that we covered the wide receivers earlier in the week a lot, but I do think when you have such a young group, having, 2 quarterbacks split first team reps. So I think that having all summer now to be able to get reps from Kaliakmanis, in off-season workouts and leading up to training camp, obviously with the younger quarterbacks as well, it just creates a little bit more clarity for a wide receiver group that, is predominantly freshmen and sophomores that, need to obviously take a step up for this offense as well. But yeah, totally agree. It's pretty much all of Shiraka's personnel at this point. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see how different the offense looks. Obviously, it's his system last year as well. but with the personnel he has, he is going to have the opportunity to make it a little bit different, I think. So obviously with tight end now, it looks a little bit different than last year. Kenny Fletcher coming over from the defense looked pretty good in the spring game. Mike Higgins is back. Victor Konopka is back. Logan Blake. So what were your thoughts on tight end now and how this move at quarterback impacts them as well?
Well, that's where I was going to say, we talked a little bit about this earlier in the week, but there's a lot more clarity now in probably what you're going to see from the tight end room. I think the biggest guy who's impacted by this is Victor Konopka, because I know his weight is only listed at like 255 and maybe somebody else is 240 or 245, but he is the biggest guy for sure when you just see him in pads. And if you're a run heavy team who's got to be in a lot of run heavy sets, I think that he's going to get less. I'm sure he's going to be in the goal line package for sure. I would still think there's an avenue for Konopka to be a red zone target, but Higgins, Blake, and Fletcher all showed more than him. And now that you have Kaliakmanis as your starting quarterback who does see tight ends better, A, they're going to get more targets, and B, it's probably less paramount that you're, 6'7", 255 pounds for the quarterback to be able to see that you're available to catch the ball. And also with the improved accuracy, one of the reasons we thought Konopka was going to be so vital is he's so big that a slightly mistargeted pass, he should have the catch radius to handle it. But with this, I thought that Kaliakmanis had good chemistry with Blake and Fletcher in the spring game. So I would expect that they're going to be in line for more reps as looking like better receiving guys. Again, I could see Higgins and Blake being roughly equal because we haven't been at practice. And maybe if Higgins was on the white team and Blake was on the red team, I would be saying the opposite right now. But I do think that we should see more tight end receptions this upcoming season. But the other thing to add is they, as a whole, even though they're winners in terms of catching more passes, they might get less snaps because in the Gavin Wimsatt experience, there's really never a situation where you would want to go 4 wide. You always would want to keep at least one inline tight end in there. So is it possible that we see some 4 wide receiver sets in the future? Maybe that 4th wide receiver is KJ Duff or a guy we didn't talk about the other day who got a lot of action, DeAndre Johnson. He's very thin, but he is 6'8". And I think right now he looks like he could stay at receiver. But in the future, maybe if they start using more of a flex tight end as an actual position on the team, which we haven't really seen in recent years, and maybe KJ Duff's your guy, but maybe DeAndre Johnson grows into that role as well, where they're kind of like a hybrid tight end wide receiver. Maybe you put them in motion to get a little bit more momentum if they need to block, but it also just gives one more thing for defenses to think about. So I really think that this shakes up how you might utilize your tight ends a lot more than we had previously would have done, because even if Gavin was still your backup, like I talked about with defense, you don't want to completely change your offense around in case your backup has to come in. Like that doesn't really make sense. So this way we probably, they say never waste a crisis. Well, never waste an opportunity to potentially start sprinkling in another wrinkle that we know exists in this offense. We just haven't seen it.
And that leads us to running back. Certainly there's some fans that are concerned with Gavin gone, his impact in the running game. I think this opens up, like you said, opportunity also for the run game, just in terms of Kaliakmanis is potentially stretching the defense more in the pass game. And also with a deep running back room, it's just going to give them a different look. So what are your thoughts on how Kaliakmanis being the starter impacts the running back room and also how they'll be utilized?
Yeah, well, first of all, a point that you made about the short yardage, yeah, it makes sense to give those carries to Sam Brown or even Gabe Winovich, the freshman, at the goal line. If they're pushing for Kyle Monangai for Heisman, you're going to have to give him those carries. But those are unnecessary hits that I don't think he needs to take at the goal line. So that's a perfect opportunity to feed a few other mouths while also giving these guys an opportunity that's a pretty high conversion rate for them in those short yardage situations. I do think that Or if you want to go in the reverse, and I know Shiano likes to have those small backs that defenders can't see. So even if you're not in a goal line, but in a short yardage situation, but maybe in the middle of the field, maybe that's somewhere where you get Jason Benjamin or Guerrero a carry if Monungai is, has to get a rest, because defenses might not know where a guy's going to pop out from and dart out and get a large gain. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And one of the things that I try to harp on when we talk about this is it's really important on a football team to have a little bit of attrition at all three levels on both sides of the ball every year. Because when that happens, guys see the opportunity to grow and get more playing time. And if they come into the season, and even if they don't transfer, there's this kind of a little bit of complacency, like, hey, the three guys who are starting in front of me are back. I might not put in the same amount of time and persistence. Whereas this is a great opportunity for one of these running backs to really hit the weight room hard, hit the film hard, and then vault themselves into that conversation. So yeah, even though the running back room only lost Avery Young and we're adding more guys, you have to view some of those Gavin carries as an opportunity for the other running backs. So I think that's one. And then the other is just the receiving game, because I know we kind of I said it, you said it, everyone talked about that screen pass that Gavin threw, not a screen, I think it was a check down to Winovich that was just behind him. And you can see why early in the season, Rutgers went to a couple of those running back wheel routes, had success, but they never went back to it. It's because of a fear of inaccuracy, pick sixes, stuff like that, where you might see even two back sets now where there's more of those flare passes by design that just adds another wrinkle, because you're going to have to offset the Gavin's ability in the read option game. So one way to do that is to throw quick hitters to your running backs to basically achieve the same thing. So I expect a lot of that, as well as, we'll see some read option again, because now we don't have an experienced number two. We talked about that. So they have to come up with other ways to get those quick, easy yards. And the running backs have every opportunity now to put their hats in the ring for those additional reps and those additional touches.
Yeah, those are great points. And then just in terms of offensive line, a lot of stability there, not something we're used to. Battle seems like at right tackle, otherwise it's pretty set. Obviously, building depth is important. But what are your thoughts just in terms of, this unit last year did a really good job of not giving up many sacks at all. I forget where they ended up ranked, but they were up there in the Big Ten and nationally. How much is that a potential change just with having, a less mobile threat? Let's say we've talked about Kaliakmanis being more mobile than maybe people give him credit for, but how much do you think that impacts them not having Wimsatt back there versus a more traditional pocket passer, and just for the group overall?
I think it's huge, a major impact for several reasons. Number one is that defenses are likely going to keep less people in the box, which should help your pass protection. But on the flip side, because there's a higher probability that you're going to pass, there's more likely that they're going to send pass blitzes, not just necessarily run blitzes. Sometimes against Rutgers last year, we saw almost what was more what I would call a run blitz, where they kind of expect Rutgers going to run, even if it's especially if it's 3rd and 3. 3rd and 7, okay, maybe Rutgers surprised with some runs, but there was plenty of times last year where the defense just knew Rutgers was going to run. Even in that Miami game, there was a couple times where they just sent everyone. They're like, all right, dare them to throw it a hot read or something like that. So do expect more pass blitzes, which can be more exotic than a run blitz. A run blitz, usually you're just sending your people to fill a gap, whereas a pass blitz, we might see more stunts, more crossing. But the risk of doing that for a defense against Rutgers last year is if you have two guys crossing each other and the offensive linemen read it, they can create a huge gap for Monungai or at sometimes Wimsatt to run through. And so expect that, with Rutgers potentially throwing the ball more, and I say potentially because it's entirely possible that they won't adjust as much as we think, but at least it gives the defense something to think about. It's possible that the passing concepts that Rutgers runs, they need to be wary on the offensive line that they might have to be dealing with more exotic pressure looks, especially on those 3rd downs. So that makes pass protection even more paramount, especially in a situation where you are flexing out your tight end And now your tackles are on an island a little bit more. They don't have help with a chip. And so you're really going to need your guys to hold up even more. Like if you're sending Kenny Fletcher out on a route and he's not as big to chip somebody as the previous tight ends. And B, that means that tackle, maybe even if they get a quick chip, they're going to have to hold up in time for allow those passes to get out. So I think that all of this is a huge change. That being said, at least Rutgers is ahead of it. Defenses don't know what they're going to have to expect. They're probably going to be watching Soraka film from 2, 3, 4 years ago, not just last year, to try to figure out in the offseason, like, hey, what might it be like when we face Rutgers? So I think it's a huge, huge change potentially. Or Rutgers could just double down and just basically run the same offense, but just try to execute a couple different concepts. So in terms of the just scheme alone, and we'll get to personnel in a second, I think it could be a major, major deal.
I think what you're saying is that it gives more value to making this decision now, simply because Kaliakmanis and Wimsatt stylistically are different. And if you're going to make a change from what it was last year, doing it now makes the most sense because you have a full summer, you have a full 3 months now, you're going to training camp. Everybody will know, the roles, the system, and the style they want to play. How valuable do you think that was to making the decision now? And any last thoughts on offense as a whole in terms of this impact?
Well, I would say I think it helps in preparation for especially like the video guys. Like there's some staffers who are not as high that we don't think about as regularly. But if you're like a video guy and you know that this might be at the disposal of you when you're watching film of Indiana, you can come to Kirk Sriracha and Soraka and say, here, this is some of the things I saw on tape that they were vulnerable to. And he might not put it in the game plan, but you're starting to take those notes. You're starting to build those like advanced scouting of like, hey, how might we attack, some of these teams? Obviously, Rutgers doesn't have to face the big boys like Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, so I guess that's good. But of the other remaining opponents, maybe there's some wrinkles that you can come to the coaching staff and say, okay, hey, we might see a vulnerability here. In terms of personnel, I think that Holland Pierce is even more important now, as if he wasn't the most important guy on offense, potentially other than Manungai last year. Definitely is now, because there's going to be more time when he is all by himself. On the right side, I think that you might have to prioritize pass protection more than run blocking. And we know that Reggie Sutton's coming back from injury. A big question is just not even where he is right now, but where is he going to be for the start of the season? Tyler Needham performed well in early season action last year. He performed well in the spring game. I think that he's a good option in pass protection. I think that Kobe Asamoah, needs to continue to even get better. I know he won the most improved, but he's got to get better. I feel that the backup linemen are much more suited as run blockers, like Amir Stinnett, even John Stone. Terrence Salami was doing a good job in there during his time at center on the white team. I think the interior linemen, I think that these guys are better equipped for run blocking. So how much they're going to have to be good in pass protection is a big question. I thought Taj White, who I've been high on, I don't think he has as good a game as I hoped he would. So if he's your backup left tackle, you better have a contingency plan. I don't know if that's giving, Sutton or Needham additional reps at left tackle for whoever, let's say, loses the right tackle job. I'm not sure about that, but you got to assume that Holland Pierce isn't going to play every single snap of every single game. Like, you have to be prepared for this. So some of these type of things were less of a problem last year because everyone just assumed Rutgers was basically running on almost every play, unless it was 3rd and 15. So now things are going to be a little bit different into what they're looking at. Looking at the linemen, Dante Chin, I thought did okay. Mozo Williams, I'm pretty sure it was Mozo Williams. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure even though he's number 79, normally he was wearing number 50 on the red team playing left tackle. I thought he did a pretty good job in pass protection. Maybe he's your guy there. Dom Rivera, I think it's not good for him because he is a big guy, but the mobility that's going to be required to protect on more passing downs, I don't think he's ready for that yet. Obviously, he's got a few more months to prepare. Not saying he's not a long-term answer on the offensive line, but people just see this guy and speak volumes about him. But I would have to say, after what I saw in the spring game, they're going to need someone who's better in pass protection than he is right now, and some of the other guys have shown it. So I think I covered everyone who played other than Nick Oliveira, who was playing left guard. Thought he did okay. And then Carter Cadow and the younger Schifoni brother were playing in the second half. I don't see either of those guys like breaking this too deep. But really, pass protection, pass protection, pass protection. I keep saying that. Greg Schiano always kind of goes against what I say with that. He always chooses the run blocker first, but because this is Rutgers' identity. But I do think they have to be ready in case they need to, insert guys who are better at pass protection. But I was generally mixed bag, I would say, from the spring game. We need to see the starters to really know what they have for in this adjusted scheme potentially.
So just wrapping up on offense in terms of stock risers, we think this move obviously benefits the offense overall. Tight ends specifically should be more involved. Holland Pierce prioritized even more so. We talked pretty in depth earlier in the week on wide receivers. I know you were really high on Fama Teray. A lot of the starters did not play, but I think as a whole, I think this raises the ceiling for all the receivers, just in terms of really being able to identify chemistry with Kaliakmanis, as well as strengths in terms of his own versus how they can utilize certain guys in certain situations, and then the running back room as a whole as well. Any closing thoughts on offense before we shift to defense?
I would say route running is even more important. Because if there's going to be less guys in the box, that means there's more defensive backs. They have to be running very crisp routes. And I mean, I have to look back, for example, at Chris Long's history to make sure that, he's going to be one of the better route runners. But, that is going to be even more critical to this team's success when there's less space on the back end, when the guys aren't being sucked up by play action as easily. So definitely, it's hard for us to discern in just a limited sample set. But if you're watching, scrimmages or, rewatching this, keep an eye on that for those listeners that care about the wide receiver group.
Great point as always. Let's get to the defense now in terms of stock up from spring camp, spring game, and also just how you kind of project things going into next season. Let's start with the defensive line.
Well, the first guy who definitely is a winner in all this is DJ Allen, the defensive end, because with the move of Fletcher to offense, which are basically they were kind of your long pass rusher development type guys, that opened up snaps for Allen. He's like probably 3 or 4 inches taller than Fletcher. He's like just a very long, tall guy. And then also with Renee Conga transferring, that's also reps for experienced defensive line that are available for the taking. And then Cameron Stewart, I believe, also entered the transfer portal, if I'm not wrong, who is a steady 2-deep guy, but doesn't have the pass rush upside, let's say, that Allen does. So I would definitely say DJ Allen's a winner. Another guy who is a sneaky winner is Sean Cooper, the defensive end. He was wearing number 56 on red. He totally undressed both tackles for the white team at different times, which is a quick move. Now, I don't know if that's going to work against starting level players in the Big Ten, but there's a guy who's a walk-on that he made a very good case to get more playing time and potentially be a contributor. We rarely see walk-ons go on the defensive line just because of the required speed and size. But we have seen it in recent memory with Darnell Davis. So it's possible that someone like Sean Cooper could plop in. I would say, in addition, I thought Henry Hughes and Kashawn Griffin, who kind of are in that Stewart mold, but they play inside. I mean, they should be able to get more reps, make you feel a little bit better with the loss of Mayan Hanatu. I know Malcolm Ray we're obviously high on, but I do think that these guys are developing at the appropriate rate along the defensive line. Otherwise, though, Troy Rainey, I think he's already entrenched himself. I don't think Zaire Angoy even played in the game. But they're definitely defensive tackles that you feel good about. And I told you my main concern every year is that you can't stop the run up the gut. And I think even with just adding Ray through the transfer portal, enough internal organic growth is happening that Rutgers should be able to do that in this upcoming season. From the pass rush standpoint on the D-line, I don't love with the interior guys bringing a pass rush, but I mean, Keontae Hamilton, come on, buddy. This is your year. We need some pass rush coming from the interior line. And that's, a guy who really needs to step up. I don't think that he, let's say, lost any, of his standing in the lineup with what's happened. So that's generally my assessment of the defensive line. I would say the biggest winner, definitely DJ Allen. And, maybe with what we're about to talk about with linebackers, we can see Mo Toure playing defensive line again, like he did so effectively this year.
Yeah, and just to confirm, Cameron Stewart did enter the portal actually at the end of December, along with Kasir Price. DJ Allen certainly is going to have a lot of opportunity there. And, we've talked about it at length and how it impacted the defense last year. I was actually a little surprised, but happy to hear Shiano be so transparent earlier in the spring, talking about how he felt like the defensive line did not reach its potential and was as consistent as they needed them to be. So obviously building depth and having, if they could have a solid 8 to 10 man rotation, that's obviously going to be huge for next season. And I think there's a chance, based on what you're saying and what I saw as well, that this group could get there. So that's certainly encouraging, leadership-wise and just impact-wise defense. We've talked about it a lot with Aaron Lewis, but he really has a chance, I think, with a bolstered defensive line with more depth there. I think it's going to allow him and help him to really focus on his strengths and maybe potentially get less attention, but also his impact and his ability to reach his ceiling this year is paramount to, I think, the defense as a whole.
For sure. I mean, I think that, Wesley Barely, Aaron Lewis, even Jordan Thompson, who I don't think played, even though he's still listed on the roster and he's a 2-deep defensive end. All those guys have an opportunity to just do more than they did a year ago. One guy who I also didn't mention was Josiah Peterson, the former 4-star recruit who was originally an offensive lineman. Now he's playing defensive line. There's a guy who's a big body that I'm pretty sure he played for the white team after. He might have started or he might have came in like second or third series because I did see Malcolm Ray dressed. But Peterson is a guy who maybe he's someone who can bring a little bit of pass rush. And if you can get a little bit more pass rush from the interior line, that should allow Lewis and Bailey to have less attention on the outside. Because offensive lines are always going to have to account for the middle pass rush first. So if there's pressure that's coming up the middle and those guys can't block with a one guy, then double teams are going to have to be on the interior, freeing up the outside guys for more of a pass rush. So that's definitely something to be mindful of, that if Rutgers can get a little bit more interior D-line pass rush, there's going to be more space on the perimeter for a Lewis or a Bailey or even a Jordan Thompson or even, like I talked about, DJ Allen to have some space to operate than they did in years past.
Well, that's a great point. And also, you did mention Toure. It's going to be interesting to see where he does line up. We're hoping for that versatility. We both felt the defense was stronger last year when they were able to move him around. What were your thoughts on linebacker? Obviously, Tyrone Powell out with injury, but just your thoughts overall on the development of that group as well.
Well, first of all, I mean, Moses Walker just was what we thought. He was as good as we thought he would be, which was almost like a ho-hum Tim Duncan-like performance. Like basketball-wise, like he was just making the tackles he needed to make. He seemed like he was in the places he needed to be. He seemed like his unit was generally organized. Got to give the white defense credit. They seemed like they were a little bit more – there's a little less confusion about what was happening when they were out there. So I'm not sure if that's credit to Wright Collins, Davion Fuse, or Moses Walker, but they were the guys who were in the middle of that white defense. I thought that with Jameer Wright Collins, I feel as though this is like it's almost a Gavin Wimsatt situation defensively, in the sense that he has gotten better every year and he is an amazing athlete. I mean, this guy is fast. He's strong. He's got good leaping ability, but at a certain point, your development is like not as highly prioritized as the guys who are younger than you on the depth chart. So because I thought Davion Fuse did some good things at linebacker, as well as Abram Wright had a good game, I feel like Wright Collins has a role absolutely on special teams, but he didn't do enough running all over the field to kind of distance himself from these guys nipping at his heels, to say. So again, I mean, I feel fine if Jameer Wright Collins is in the 2 deep, but he's got a lot of pressure coming up for some of his reps that he's gotten. I felt like Daryl Jabomi looked trim. He looked, even more, agile than he did last year when he was forced into action, or even 2 years ago when he was forced into action in that goal line situation against Michigan. But I still think that the other guys move a little bit better than him as linebackers. So, I mean, I thought that Wright and Fuse probably improved their stock the most, or maybe you could say that Moses Walker makes you feel more confident that if, Tyreen Powell's injury is worse than we expect, or he has a setback at some point, that if Moses Walker has to step into a lot of reps, that he can do it. But I think these other guys, I mean, I've always been high on Fuse. I thought he should always be playing on the defensive side. I thought that was like my main takeaways, I would say, at linebacker. I'm not sure if MJ Johnson played. Timmy Hinesbetter got some action as well. I think Sam Gotti was playing a lot of snaps on red. I hope I didn't miss anybody on the linebackers. But again, I would say Wright, Fuse, and probably Walker were the big winners of the spring game.
Yeah, well, and I think the great thing about Walker is that, assuming Tyreen Powell is, 100% able to, come back in time or whenever he does come back, you do have that flexibility again with being able to move Teray around, because it looks like Walker's going to hold up and be able to step up as well. So having that 3-man kind of core is huge. I agree. Fuse was a pleasant surprise and definitely looked good. I think Jabomi, I wonder how much it is just the speed of the game slowing down for him in terms of getting reps and being able to kind of read the field better. Because I do feel like he has talent. And I think that, he can be a key depth piece.
I was just going to say, Jabomi, his role in special teams, even more important now. Because with a lot of the defections, this is a guy who's a 2-year vet of several special teams units. So his leadership is even more important there. And like we've talked about a lot, I like the Shiano strategy of getting guys' feet wet on special teams and kind of growing into a role. So yeah, I'm not trying to say Jabomi doesn't have a role, but as we see Rutgers have to play more passing offenses. You're going to have to prioritize the coverage skills that you really have a big hole to fill with the departure of Deion Jennings. And so like a Davion Fuse who was playing receiver, defensive back even, maybe that star position or that big nickel, like he at linebacker offers you a little bit more athleticism that you might need against, these high-powered offenses we might see this year.
Yeah, that's a great point. And special teams is obviously always important as well. So that could be a place for him to shine for sure. Moving on to defensive backs, obviously, not everyone played, but overall thoughts just in terms of who you think helped themselves and who maybe surprised you a bit.
Yeah, I mean, Crumpler for sure. We mentioned him the other day. I will be the first one to admit, when I saw the film, I even mentioned on our signing day podcast that I wasn't sure that he had enough speed for the Big Ten, but boy, was I wrong. I mean, not only is he enough speed, he's playing defensive back. Now, I know he wasn't going against the starting receivers, but for a true freshman early enrollee, he was everywhere. I mean, for the Red defense. I think part of that was because Kaj Sanders seemed like he was a pretty steadying presence at safety. I mean, kind of like Moses Walker was kind of establishing confidence and order in the middle of the white defense. I thought Kaj Sanders was doing that on red, even though he was probably one of the youngest guys on the field. It just felt like he was in control. Things were not frantic on the backside of the defense there because of that. I thought Kevin Levy also played, just wrapping up with the red team. Kevin Levy played. I think I was probably a little higher on him than most people, but he was getting targeted fairly a good amount. So I would say that he probably showed that there's still a gap between Zylan Williams, who's playing on the other side, who's a more experienced guy who probably is going to have to be in the 2 deep. I mean, I thought, unlike some of the other guys I talked about who didn't distance themselves from the true freshman, I thought Zylan Williams, for the most part, did. That, yeah, a couple passes were surrendered, but, I mean, that's this day and age in college football. I mean, I thought that he was in good position where an errant pass or if he could get a tip on a ball, he would. But sometimes it's just a perfect pass and a good catch. I mean, sometimes that just happens. So I felt like, especially when he was going against some of the bigger guys like Fama Toure, who's just kind of basically like boxing him out basketball style, that can be kind of difficult. So I was okay with Xylon Williams coming in, and then Sage Cloggis. Am I saying it right? Cloggis, I think. Sage.
I believe so. Yes.
He's kind of tall for a safety, but just like Crumpler for the red team seemed like he was everywhere. Sage seemed like he was everywhere on the white team. I thought that he was kind of hurt by some of the times that Gavin Wimsatt took a very liberal approach to going down with the ball, where he would have been tackled, but they let the play keep going for extra yardage. But I thought he's a guy who did well. Salam, who has been praised and got an award, I felt like he was okay. Maybe they were putting him in worse positions than, let's say, Crumpler or Williams, but I really thought that Salam had an uneven day, to say the least, in the game. And then the guy who I thought was unfairly burned by Wimsatt's touchdown run, because I think the play should have been blown dead, but definitely could have taken a better angle, was Jesse O'Fury. I know he's new-ish to safety, so that was probably not necessarily his fault per se. But when you compare him to someone like Kaj Sanders, and I don't know if they're going to play the same position because of how Rutgers is utilizing 3 safeties, but you have to like what you saw from Sanders, whereas O'Fury clearly demonstrated that he needs a lot more practice taking angles at the safety position. Again, this was one game. Maybe it was just a bad day, but I like Jesse O'Fury as an athlete, but I do think he needs a lot more work at the safety position to feel confident in him going into a game. Now, luckily, Rutgers' 3 starters are back at safety. It's not a position that people get hurt as much as other spots on the roster, so hopefully there's not an issue there, but it is possible. I mean, I feel like my concern about the safety position is probably a little higher than it was, whereas at corner, I think I feel better than I did before the spring game. I mean, I guess, with the new punter, it's always a roll of the dice. I mean, special teams-wise, they lost a couple big-time contributors. So does it shift the philosophy? I would probably say no. I think that there's enough experienced guys on those units that can play with that, aggression and energy. So I'm not overly worried. I know we didn't see much about special teams in the spring game, but I just think the mentality and the mental toughness of this team is really going to be tested this year, even more than last year. And the reason I say that is because they were 6-2 last year. People were feeling good. They knew that even if they lost the next 4, that they were in a bowl game. There was very little major difficulty that they faced over the course of the season, other than in the Michigan State game, which they did overcome, A+ for that. Minor in the Virginia Tech game. And then late in the season, Iowa game, Penn State game, I feel like they played pretty tough. Maryland game was kind of up and down. I think that there's going to be a lot more of a roller coaster in this upcoming season, partially having to do with the schedule where it's not as, backloaded, but also just because there's going to be a lot more variability in the teams you play. It's not like you play Iowa and then you play Penn State, who basically runs the same offense but with better personnel. Like, it's not going to be – every week's going to be a little bit different than it was last year. And so how the team handles that and how the coaches handle that is going to be very telling about how they perform in 2024.
As always, tremendous insight from David. Thank you so much. And great stuff as always. Thanks so much for watching us once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast. We'll have plenty more analysis on the football program throughout the summer.